So good morning, everybody. Good morning, and thank you for coming. The topic of the press meeting today is Raised Bill 5591, which we all know is a bill that's going to be heard by the Labor Committee today, and what it calls for is for the state to create another state authority to administer individual retirement plans to employees of companies that employ 5 people or more in the private sector. This is not a public sector initiative. This is a private sector initiative, which is, raising a lot of eyebrows, throughout not just this building, but throughout the entire state of Connecticut. Now, to start, I don't think there's anybody under the roof today who would say that it's a bad idea to encourage people to start saving as much as they can, and in particular for their retirement down the road. That's a very, very good idea. No one would ever discourage that, but I know that there are a bunch of people who are very, very worried about this state initiative to insert themselves into a position where they would be administering and managing to a certain degree these individual retirement accounts. And we'll get into why we don't think that's such a good idea in a second, but sometimes you just have to, smack yourself on the forehead in this building and say, what in God's name is the state of Connecticut doing in this business or that business? And for them to be thinking even about getting into the business of administering private sector retirement plans, IRAs, individual retirement accounts, as we know them, is just ludicrous, because they have a tough time managing their own pension system. They can't do it successfully. We're one of the lowest funded in the entire country at about 42%. I would argue it's even lower than that, but that's a number that is roughly half of where you need to be to have a solvent pension fund in place, or set of pension funds in place. So if we can't even manage our own pension affairs, what are we thinking about in thinking about and discussing getting into individual retirement account management in the private sector? There's really no reason to think that we'd be any better than the private sector. And the private sector is already taking care of the private sector. You can walk into a bank nowadays and you can get an IRA all throughout the state of Connecticut, and you can get it for free. All across this country, you can get IRA services for free. And so there's really no reason for us to even think about getting into this business. And at the end of the day, aren't we just creating another bureaucracy? It's the last thing that this state needs, is another bureaucracy. We have major fiscal challenges that we're facing today, not months down the road, today. We've been essentially insolvent for a long time now, and we're in a very bad fiscal way these days. So against that backdrop, what are we doing thinking about creating another bureaucracy? We don't know how many people would have to be hired. We know that it would cost probably $1.5 million to get it up and running, and that would be the run rate in terms of the ongoing expenses as well. So if we tend to be, as state government, the high-cost supplier of goods and services, why are we thinking about doing this in the private sector? We have such a tough time with all of these different functional areas. DMV, anybody been there lately? It's your worst nightmare. We know about the nightmares at DCF and DSS, the mismanagement and the waste and the fraud. So why are we thinking about creating another bureaucracy? So 5591 calls for automatic enrollment into an IRA in a company that has one of these plans, a company with 5 employees or more. And you have to ask yourself, there is a way to opt out, but we don't know what the hoops are that you're going to have to jump through to be able to opt out. So shouldn't it be the other way around? Shouldn't this be voluntary? Shouldn't it be the case that if you want to learn more about an IRA and put yourself into the program, you can opt in, as opposed to, what did they do to me? I'm being force-fed yet one more government program. I get a tremendous number of complaints from business folks about not only the business environment in general in the state of Connecticut, but specifically the amount of paperwork, the regulations that need to be adhered to, and just the amount of paperwork alone with the Department of Labor and the Secretary of State, everything else is enough to drive them to another state. They do not need any more of this kind of required paperwork and administration. The scariest part about this potential scheme is, at the end of the day, who's responsible for the payment down the road of retirement funds to these beneficiaries? Is it the state? The Connecticut Retirement Security Board doesn't really make it clear. They suggest that they could have a guaranteed return retirement program as one of the offerings. They refer to the state guaranteeing loosely these proceeds that would come from the IRAs down the road. So that is yet to be defined. It's scary when you think about our unfunded liabilities already at roughly $66 billion, add in the bonded indebtedness of the state of roughly 22, going to 23 billion here. That's a lot of money on a per capita basis, ladies and gentlemen, in the state of Connecticut. There are a lot of reasons why the scheme won't work. And on top of that, at a time where the administration, OPM, is withholding money that belongs to the hospitals because they're going through their weekly cash flow crisis, can we trust ourselves enough not to be in a position down the road when things are even more challenging to divert funds that could be going to an IRA, or worse yet, taking it out of an existing account? Would that be the tendency on the state of Connecticut? I don't know. I'm just saying. So it's a tall order, according to the Connecticut Retirement Security Board, to put this scheme into place. And the reason for that is that they need to get to $1 billion of assets under management before it reaches critical mass. And at that point, they might be able to take care of their startup costs as well as their fees, and that's going to take, they say, 3 to 5 years. And that's at a required contribution rate of 6%. I don't know how many people in this wage category would want to put 6% into a retirement fund, so that they have the option to opt out, as we all know. So if they can do that in 3 to 5 years' time, reach critical mass by imposing these fees, it implies that the beneficiary is getting ripped off on a fee basis. Why not just go to an already existing IRA program in one of the banks and get it for free? Lastly, the overhead costs in government go up so much faster than in the private sector. We know that. So if anything, those fees are going to be going up continuously at a rapid rate, more rapid rate than they would in the private sector. So as we Republicans do every time there's a controversial idea floating around the building, we always come up with an alternative idea, and it's one that I like a lot, and I'm going to let Senator Boucher describe that particular plan, because it's a good one.
Good morning. I'm happy to join my Senate colleagues today to provide a better alternative to House Bill 5591, a bill that would have the state of Connecticut compete head-to-head with Connecticut's retirement investment industry. The alternative plan we're proposing is based on the state of Washington plan, which is now law. Their plan establishes a small business retirement plan marketplace in their state Department of Commerce. The marketplace would promote participation in low-cost, low-burden retirement savings plans and educate small employers on plan availability. The director of the marketplace would work with the private sector to establish a program that connects eligible employers with qualifying plans. Participation in the marketplace is, and this is the most important part, completely voluntary, both for employers and employees. But only those that are self-employed, sole proprietors, or employers with fewer than 100 employees are eligible to participate in their plan. The marketplace director must approve a diverse array of private retirement plan options from the private sector. In other words, they're supporting, they're essentially marketing their private sector industries. Finally, the plan authorizes the appropriation for them of $100,000 back in 2015 and $50,000 in 2016 to 2018 for implementation of their plan. We believe that this idea is a more balanced approach that uses the power of the state to bring together employers and private sector financial service organizations to promote participation in private retirement plans. This is similar, you might say, to having a healthcare insurance exchange model applied sort of to the retirement plans. But it would not have just a few choices as we have in that, but many, many choices in the private sector, and it partners with them. And most importantly, it's not a mandate, it's entirely voluntary. It would create essentially a one-stop shopping place for employers to quickly identify and enroll in financially prudent, qualified private plans, vastly lowering their administrative costs and the risk associated with trying to investigate and choose plans of their own. There is, I believe, having many decades of experience in that industry, a lot of risk associated with the plan 5591. To be clear, and I'm going to do a little repeating, I'm going to repeat a bit of the comments by my colleague Scott Frantz. This creates a small business retirement plan marketplace, not the provider of the plan or the caretaker of the plan. It promotes participation in low-cost savings plans, educates small employers on plan availability, and works with the private sector to connect eligible employees. In Washington State, this small business retirement marketplace program is run, again, by the State Department of Commerce. And it does establish a digital marketplace to match employers with 100 or less employees with private sector plans. Again, no risk to the state, as the state does not directly provide the plan. The state shouldn't be providing plan. It shouldn't be in the private sector business. It should take care of its core businesses. So it works with the private sector to develop this and establish protocols. And again, the cost for their plan was $150,000 for 2 years. Interestingly enough, it received bipartisan support and approval and accolades from the AARP, the Washington Bankers Association, the American Council of Life Insurance, and SIFMA, which is the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association, which is their voice in the United States of the U.S. securities industry. And it really represents a lot of the folks that would be impacted by this. So it did receive quite a bit of support. So let's repeat why House Bill 5591 should be rejected and the Republican alternative plan supported. We've just lost GE and other companies due to our oppressive tax and regulatory environment. We should not have the state effectively take over an entire industry, retirement planning and investment, and supplant a large and vital segment of our own private sector. This new mandate on employers will not only add to the increasing and disproportionate burdens Connecticut already places on employers, decreasing our ability to compete with businesses and put Connecticut, and what has been putting Connecticut, at the bottom of almost every national ranking for business. Proposals like this are some of the reasons that we created this hostile environment. It's part of the reason that we lose these large companies and even small ones. This plan that is being proposed today by the Democratic side creates a new bureaucracy in state government with control over potentially billions of dollars of private investment. It adds an unacceptable risk both to taxpayers and contributing employers and employees. Let me tell you, I bet you they didn't even discuss the potential of what happens when one of these small businesses close and one of these plans has to be closed down. Many employees can borrow against a retirement plan. They have to pay it back. What happens when they leave or when the company folds? That has been a very difficult process for even the private sector to deal with. Even the board that's being created in this proposal by the Democrats acknowledges questionable financial stability and sustainability of the program should participation and contribution levels not match assumptions. And you know how it's doing right now with budget and revenues assumptions to date just on our own budget, never mind this very big billion-dollar plan. House Bill 5591 may also encourage employers who currently offer retirement plans to dump those plans and dump those employees on the state plan. With a steady outflow of individuals and businesses hampering Connecticut's financial development, the state should be looking for ways to bolster the remaining successful businesses it has. And this is one of those areas that we should be supporting. Retirement planning is one area which there's an abundance of top-notch providers, yet Democrats are proposing a state-run plan, a mandated plan for private sector workers. It creates a new bureaucracy, as we said, with which private companies will have to contend, increasing demand on their own time, which they have very little already. A participation is nominally voluntary, yet firms with more than 5 employees would be required to automatically, remember this is mandating, automatically enroll their employees, and those employees would have to opt out rather than opt in. So it is a huge mandate on business. And you all know this. All of us here in Connecticut and every one of you in the media, you know that this is not a good time to impose further burdens on businesses that in recent years have been saddled with an ever-expanding number of government-mandated payments, including payroll payments. The language of the Democrats' proposed Connecticut Retirement Security Board appears to recognize that people may not have the ability to pay for their plan. The state-run IRA fund would require, as Scott Frantz just said, $1 billion in assets to be self-sustaining. The board has admitted that an employee contribution rate of less than the top rate of 6% would not work if this didn't happen, and the plan would potentially fail. This is at a time, and I underscore this, at a time when the state cannot manage its own pension fund, which is funded at only 42%, when the standard is 85%. My goodness, what are we thinking? If they can't manage their own pension plan, they would propose a plan to take over private sector 401 plans and try to manage that as well. And as I said, I'm going to conclude with this, and we can't repeat this enough. A state-administered IRA plan would compete directly with private sector companies, worsening our already precarious business environment, and by passing 5591 would exacerbate our declining tax revenue and further loss of high-wage jobs, which is happening at an alarming rate. As we heard from Ben Barnes recently in our Finance Committee that both Scott Frantz, who's our ranking member, and I sit on as well, when he showed us a chart just recently showing the massive loss of high-waging jobs, yet being replaced by much lower-waging jobs, which, by the way, produces less tax income. The Senate Republicans' proposed plan would address the desire for more private sector workers to save for retirement, build financial security for themselves, that would support the private sector, not compete with them. It's based on this Washington plan, and it is a great alternative, And the advantage of the plan is that it harnesses the efficiencies of private sector firms to deliver a range of retirement investment services to businesses and their employees cost effectively. This is the bottom line. The state's goal should be to help grow private sector businesses instead of putting them at further risk for closure, and to promote better informed and more proactive retirement savings among private sector workers. By acting as a clearinghouse, as our alternative plan would provide for private plans rather than direct competitor, the state would satisfy these goals in an arrangement that is a win-win for all involved.
Thank you, Tony. I agree with everything that's been said. Let me just throw out a couple of other points. One, with the House bill that's in front of us, there's no flexibility for any employee to determine how they want their money invested. For instance, you could have a more risky investment, a less risky investment, depending on where you are in life and what your assets are. You can maximize your retirement by having a plan that over your investment period equals the risk that you may want to take. That flexibility is gone. Number two is we're going to pick a winner here. And the winner is going to be that person who gets, or company who gets to invest $1 billion of pension fund money as a monopoly. Clearly as a monopoly, because under their bill, it's mandated, it's opt-out, it's 6% default. People are going to be mandated to go with one company, unless they opt out, but with one company, they're going to end up controlling $1 billion net worth, one individual. I don't think that's the right way we should do it. I think that that's wrong. Finally, and equally important, is ERISA. This plan violates ERISA, which means you can't pass it. Now, the only way you can pass it is currently there's some regulations in the Department of Labor which would exempt out state-run plans. Those regulations have not been passed yet. They're proposed. With the presidential election, and who knows what the outcome of that's going to be, I would suggest nothing's going to happen on this front till after November. And then after November, depending who's president, I guess may depend on whether those regulations get passed. So this is a fool's errand because we can't do it. But I'll tell you what we can do. The Republican plan, the Washington plan, that can go forward today. That is going to avoid ERISA, which means if you're really serious about retirement, that's the one you want to grab onto. With that, we'll take any questions that people will have.